Hey, it's Luxury Travel Docs here today, reporting to you from the Enchanted Princess, and we are docked in St. Thomas, U.S. Virgin Islands today. You may have seen our last video when we reported to you from the Regal Princess over New Year's, which happened to be in the middle of the Omicron surge. Well, we are back on board now, and really things have not changed a lot, with the exception of the Omicron surge now getting better and case numbers appear to be going down. Some interesting news that's occurred in the cruise industry over the last week or so. There was an announcement about a day or two ago by Norwegian Cruise Lines that they are going to no longer require their passengers to wear masks on board, but they probably are going to require that the cruise still does. Royal Caribbean also announced that they had a passenger COVID positivity rate less than 1%. They announced that they had about 5,900 fleet-wide COVID cases after carrying well over 1 million passengers. Of course, Royal Caribbean has had their own issues during the restart of the cruise industry in 2021 as guidance from the CDC has slowly been lifted. Well, what about Princess Cruises? Princess Cruises does require that all passengers have received the full course of a vaccine at least 14 days prior to boarding. In addition, they require that all passengers have a negative COVID test performed at the most 2 days prior to boarding their ships. If you haven't seen it yet, we did do a video showing you the Abbott Binax Now telehealth monitored COVID test that you can do at home, and that's been our test of choice prior to cruising. As we said in the video, it's very easy and extremely convenient, and in our opinion worth the money, which is about $25-30 to have that method of testing rather than having a test done at the port or one performed at CVS. Now, on board the Enchanted Princess, we have about 1,982 passengers. The capacity is around 3,900 passengers. In addition, we have around 1,327 crew members, and that's kind of a nice ratio when you talk about the number of crew to passenger ratio. Now, Princess Cruises has really taken a conservative stance on returning to cruising. On our last cruise aboard the Regal Princess over New Year's, some of the news that came out while we were on board was that the CDC was likely going to lift the provisional sailing order on January 15th, and in fact that did occur. It appears, however, that Princess is making a slow return to full capacity, and we expect that the capacity of Princess Cruises is likely going to increase starting in the spring break season, and probably with a target of returning to nearer full capacity over the summer during the Alaskan cruise season, which is one of the top destinations of Princess Cruises. What about boarding? As you know, last month we boarded the Regal Princess in Port Everglades, and that process was a little slow. This time, boarding the Enchanted Princess was much faster, the lines were shorter, but the same things happened this time, like being corralled once you enter the cruise port terminal. You know what I mean, just like being at Walt Disney World, where you enter a room and then all of a sudden the line seems to snake around and become 10 times longer. There's nothing like walking down the gangway and entering the cruise ship and having all of the crew there cheering you on and clapping because they're so happy to be back to cruising. In general, Princess Cruises has a lot of the same measures in place, such as the sip and cover, and if you've been on Princess Cruises recently, that will ring home to you, because sip and cover is said all over the ship, where they want you to have a mask on at all times if you're indoors, and if you're eating or drinking, you can remove the mask. If you're drinking, they ask that you take a sip of your drink and then put your mask back on. In general, most passengers have been very compliant with wearing their mask on board. You will see an occasional passenger that forgets to put their mask on, and then the minute they see you, they realize and they put their mask on. The passengers generally are not wearing their masks outdoors, so if you're at the pool, you will not see most passengers wearing a mask. We were provided blue surgical masks when we boarded the Regal Princess over New Year's, and we could order more to be sent to our cabin as we wanted, and they were complimentary. When we boarded the Enchanted Princess, there were 4 KN95 masks sitting in our cabin on the desk available for us to use. The other thing that's kind of interesting when you are on the Enchanted Princess is that at any of the bars or restaurants you could ask for a blue surgical mask if you need it. For example, one point I got up from the Crown Grill to use the ladies' room and I realized I had forgotten my mask. I went to go turn around to go back and get my mask out of my purse, and the hostess at the check-in station said, "Oh, I can give you a mask," and she handed me a blue mask that was packaged separately from the other masks, and I was able to open it and use it. We've also talked to other passengers who had asked for some masks when they were in one of the stores because they had forgotten their masks in their cabin. These little touches certainly make passengers feel secure about being on board. There are hand sanitizers all over the ship with crew members actively reminding you to sanitize your hands, particularly if you're going to be coming in close contact with a buffet or the gym, for example. There are also signs all over the ship reminding individuals to wear their mask, reminding you to cough into your sleeve, reminding you to use a tissue to cover your mouth if you have to sneeze or cough. And everywhere you turn, there is a sign reminding you of that. There is a certain level of anxiety amongst the passengers associated with the COVID-19 pandemic. That is very palpable on board the Enchanted Princess. And I have to say that when we boarded the Regal Princess over New Year's, we had a certain level of anxiety when we first got on board, where we really tried to stay away from people, tried to make sure that we had our mask on. But as we cruised and really watched the protocols being followed very closely on board Princess Cruises, we relaxed toward the end of the cruise. And maybe that's why we can really feel the anxiety amongst the passengers on the Enchanted Princess. Again, maybe some of these passengers have not cruised before. Maybe they, for whatever personal reason, have a certain level of anxiety. But there have been passengers who will get upset if there are more than 4 people on an elevator. There are passengers who get upset if somebody forgets to put their mask on. So it's there, and we really are just trying to be patient with people like that, because you never know what somebody's feelings are, and we really try to be respectful of that. Wow, additional news just keeps coming in. In the couple of days after we filmed this video, first Royal Caribbean and then Carnival Cruise Line announced that they are not going to require masks any longer. And then the day after we returned from our cruise, Princess announced that effective March 1st, masks on board will be recommended but not required. There may, however, be certain venues and events where masks will be required. We just figured it's important to update you on these events as they keep coming in prior to publishing this video. Now, what about the crew? One thing that I think is really important to point out, especially compared to when we were on the Regal Princess, is that the crew here on the Enchanted, and this is slowly being reinstituted fleet-wide, the crew is now allowed to disembark from the ship to do their shopping in port, whereas for a long time they were not allowed to. So I think that that's a really important point to make. There have been a lot of passengers who have been bringing the crew gifts, knowing that they have not been able to get off the ship, bringing them, toiletries, chocolate, other things from home that they might not be able to get because they weren't able to get off the ship. Crew on board the Enchanted Princess has been very directive in making sure that the passengers wash their hands or sanitize or have their mask on. And I actually feel that this has been a little more evident on this cruise compared to the Regal Princess. If you're walking through the gym and are not actively working out on a treadmill, for example, you will be instructed to put your mask on. If you are at the buffet in the Elite Lounge at night and you walk up near one of the crew, you will be instructed to put your mask on. As we said in our last video on board the Regal Princess, the crew are actively sanitizing areas left and right. If you are occupying a table, eating at the buffet, for example, a crew member is immediately there when you stand up and sanitizing the chairs, sanitizing the table, and this is seen all over the place. In the Princess Theater, for example, you will see staff in there disinfecting the seats between shows. They wipe down the handrails constantly. They wipe down the walls constantly. We've seen them changing filters on the ship. These things are occurring everywhere. What about the entertainment? We told you on board the Regal Princess that we did not have the full complement of dancers on board. I can report to you that on the Enchanted Princess, we do have the full number of singers and dancers, and they have been excellent. You will see the dancers wearing masks because they are not actively singing like the singers are. The singers are not wearing masks because probably not that easy to hear with a mask on. You probably saw in our last video about the Omicron surge over New Year's that the quarantine area on the Regal Princess was located on decks 8 and 9 from midship up to past the forward elevators. On the Enchanted Princess, there are 2 quarantine levels as well. The deck 8 quarantine level this time is located on the starboard side from the midship elevators forward, and then all of deck 9 from the midship elevators forward are also quarantine areas. In our last video, we were able to show you part of the quarantine area on board the Regal Princess. We were walking through the ship one night and noticed that part of the quarantine area was open, and fortunately it was empty, but we were able to see what areas are used, and also we were able to show how the PPE is organized. Now, who is in the quarantine area? Predominantly it consists of crew members who have arrived on the ship. Newly arriving crew members need to quarantine for 7 to 10 days. One of the things that's been a little bit different on this ship is noticeable in the buffet located on deck 16. Still, the crew are serving you if you go to the buffet. You can get your own coffee and water, which you couldn't when we were on board the Regal Princess, so that actually is a step in the right direction. However, you will notice that the crew is really not as forceful in making the passengers wash their hands or sanitize prior to entering the buffet. And that's a little bit of a disappointment for us in comparison to the Regal Princess, because on the Regal Princess, the crew who was stationed at the ends of the buffet on deck 16 were very, very particular about making sure that passengers wash their hands in front of them and or sanitize their hands. I have witnessed personally many passengers walking past me saying, "Oh, I just washed my hands," or "Oh, I just sanitized my hands," and then they keep walking without any sort of insistence upon the crew in making sure that the actual passenger does comply with the rules. We've had no changes in the itinerary for our Eastern Southern Caribbean voyage on the Enchanted Princess. If you remember, when we filmed on the Regal Princess, we did have one major port of call change where we were not allowed entry into Puerto Rico because a negative COVID test was required prior to disembarking for a day in Puerto Rico, and the Regal Princess really wasn't outfitted to have that performed on all the passengers. Instead, we went to Turks and Caicos. We did have 2 ports of call where you could not embark on any independent tours or exploration. These were St. Lucia and Barbados. According to the Shore Excursion Desk, you could take authorized Princess Shore excursions, or you could take transportation in a government-approved tour or a government-approved taxi. These restrictions did not seem to bother most of the passengers, although I have to say it was difficult planning anything independently, knowing that some of these restrictions were going to be in place. At the ports of call, there have been variable levels of COVID precautions. In Antigua, there were required temperature checks upon exiting the ship and entering the port. You had to wear your mask both indoors and outdoors, and for the most part, the locals were complying with this mandate. We told you on the last video on board the Regal Princess that most of the crew were vaccinated with the Pfizer vaccine. They received both doses and were boosted appropriately. On the Enchanted, most of the crew have received vaccines by either Pfizer or Moderna. They have received both doses and they've been boosted when appropriate. They also are tested regularly. For example, on this itinerary, all the crew will be tested 2 days prior to arrival back in Fort Lauderdale. Well, we're all packed up and ready to go, so we wanted to give you some final thoughts about our cruise on the Enchanted Princess. Princess continues to do a great job at making us feel safe but also valued as a passenger. We love the conservative approach that Princess Cruises is having by reinstituting sailing slowly. The ships are still running at reduced capacity, and we were just slightly over 50% capacity on this ship. As we said, we expect that Princess Cruises is probably going to be back up to full capacity during spring break and definitely going into the Alaskan cruise season. Now, this is just our opinion, and we have no solid evidence about that. Princess Cruise Lines has health protocols in place, and we found that the crew, as well as the passengers, are following those protocols well. The Enchanted Princess is the flagship of the Princess Cruise Fleet at this time, but that's going to change pretty soon as the Discovery Princess is going to be launched. Because this is the flagship, we had the Commodore of the fleet as our captain on the ship, and maybe that's why the ship ran so well. The ship itself is a beautiful ship with great service, great food, great entertainment, and all the amenities that you would expect from a new ship. If you have any suggestions or comments about this video or suggestions for future videos, we'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Always remember to make meaningful and healthy travel happen, and we'll see you next time.